Property taxes in the city of Buffalo are going up next year. How much of an increase? Well, if you're a normal, regular, everyday person, you're looking at a property tax increase of between $25 to $30 a month. There's a website the city has right now where you can punch in your address. It tells you what your estimated property tax hike will be for next year. I made all my friends and family look at it, and if you know anybody who's getting more than a $30 a month increase, then you know somebody who lives in a nicer house than literally everybody I'm related to or are friends with. Why are the property taxes going up? Well, Buffalo had the same mayor for 20 years. That was Byron Brown. And during those 20 years, Brown made barely any changes or adjustment to the tax code in the city. Under Mayor Brown's first budget back in 2006, the city collected $146 million in property taxes from Buffalonians. Brown left office in 2025. If you were to take that $146 million and just adjust it for inflation, you would have to assume that Brown's last budget would be somewhere around $240 million. But it wasn't. The last year that Byron Brown was mayor, he collected $185 million worth of property tax revenue from Buffalonians. So what we're saying here is while Byron Brown was mayor, the amount of money the city was collecting from people stayed relatively flat. However, during those 20 years, inflation is still happening. So the cost of buying health insurance for the ladies that work in the permits office on the 3rd floor there at City Hall, the cost of buying fuel for snowplows, whatever, all of that stuff is increasing like this, while the amount of money that the city is collecting from its citizens is increasing like this. Sean Ryan is Buffalo's new mayor. This is his first budget. And he says his big priority right now out of the gate is going to be putting Buffalo in a better financial position. Part of that for him is going to be to adjust property taxes so they catch up more toward where they would have been if they had been keeping up with the pace of inflation over the last 20 years. Okay, frequently asked questions. Couldn't the city just sell some property instead? For example, the city already has or is just talking about, I don't know, I didn't follow this story very well, but like selling a couple of the parking ramps, the public parking ramps downtown, to raise a couple tens of $1 millions. But whenever asked about this, Sean Ryan gives the same answer, which is that'll help out in 2027, but what are we going to do in 2028 and 2029 and 2030? You can't sell the same building every year. And I've heard Ryan use this line several times. He says, I'm looking for systemic and systematic fixes. I don't want to be jumping from funding gimmick to funding gimmick. Another frequently asked question, can't Buffalo just get a one-time grant like New York City just got from the state? And the answer is yes. We already got it right after he was sworn in as mayor. Sean Ryan went to Albany. He negotiated a $40 million grant from the state. But Ryan would say, but we're not going to get that money every single year. Can't you just cut spending? Ryan's answer to this is always, well, what is there left to cut? The city of Buffalo spends about as much money every year as the city of Rochester, despite Buffalo having a larger population. Buffalo already has a ton of spending that it needs to do on its infrastructure that it's already not doing, right? Remember all those water main breaks over the winter? Like, that's not the result of like one bad winter, right? That's the result of decades of neglect and putting off repairs. I did not know about this until Sean Ryan started publicizing it, but apparently a couple years ago, the roof on the garage at one of the city impound lots caved in, and Byron Brown just literally bought them a tarp and said, make do. Anyway, all of that is to say, whether you agree with it or not, Sean Ryan is basically saying nobody shows up in downtown Buffalo and says, wow, this place is super fancy. They must be spending a lot of money on themselves. He doesn't think that there's anything that he wants to cut. If anything, he wants to be investing more in the city. That's just his position on that. I have a follow-up question, though, for Mr. Ryan. What about the police budget? And the answer always is, we don't talk about the police budget. But whatever, every city in New York has an overinflated police department budget. That's its own separate problem. Another frequently asked question, why property taxes? So only 40% of the money spent by the city of Buffalo comes from Buffalonians. The other 60% of the money that the city of Buffalo spends was given to it by the state, by the county, or by the federal government. Cities in New York State do have limited powers to do things like business taxes, but all of that requires permission from Albany. The city really only has one power to tax in New York State, and that is property taxes. Okay, so the only taxes that a city can levy on its own are property taxes. Is there any other thing that a city can do to raise revenue? So there's also things like fines, fees, and tickets. Those aren't like legally, technically taxes because like you have to break a law first in order for the city to be able to charge you for those things. And Sean Ryan did recently float the idea of looking back 8 years and trying to collect all of the unpaid parking tickets, you left the garbage can out on the curb overnight tickets, you have a couch on your porch tickets, things like that. But personally, this is a personal opinion, I don't think that's going to go anywhere because the city council was real pissed real fast about that. City council said, look, the type of people who are trying to avoid paying their parking tickets are the type of folks who are like broke anyway. So it's a dick move to try to put the balancing of the city's budget on their backs. So the idea was politically unpopular right out of the gate. Plus, apparently there's not that much money sitting around in this unpaid fees and fines theoretical bucket. So I do not expect that really to go anywhere, but I could be wrong. Okay, so far in this video, I haven't really given my personal opinion. I'm just talking about like what is the situation and how did we get here. And if you don't want to know my unsolicited opinion, that is totally fair. But just in like the interest of transparency, I don't mind telling people the thoughts that immediately popped into my head as I was sitting there reading the paper and reading the city website and like trying to understand like this financial situation. And here's a thought that like popped in my head and like I just can't get it out. If at the bottom of all this, like the root cause of all this is just the city didn't keep up with inflation, then like obviously the taxes have to go up at some point because inflation is always going to keep happening. Even if you were to reduce the police department's budget to 0 next year, all that's doing is buying you time, because the cost of having a water and sewage system, the cost of electricity, all of those things are going to keep going up. So the cost of running a city is always going to keep coming up, even if you're not doing anything different as a city year to year. So at some point, like, this is just going to catch up to you. So I'm just going to say it doesn't sound crazy to me when Ryan says, look, anything that we do that isn't just raising the property taxes is Buffalo just kicking the can down the road. All that being said, there's definitely still like wiggle room here in figuring out how to do this property tax hike in a way that's fair, in a way that's manageable. Does it need to be a $25 hike in 1 year? Could it be like a $15 hike next year and a $15 hike again the year after that, as a way of letting people's like wages catch up to the increase in property taxes? Legally, is it possible to have it skewed so that homes that are valued very high are getting like a $40 a month hike, and homes that are valued more on the average side are getting like a $15 or $20 a month hike? Can we do a special property tax that just applies to people's second homes like they did in New York City? Although I don't know how many millionaires have a second home in Buffalo, New York, but I'm saying it as to give you an example of what I'm talking about when I say, okay, if this property tax hike is inevitable, are there creative things we can do to kind of spread it around so it's not so painful? Those are all conversations that I'm interested in paying attention to, like the how do we do this in a way that it makes it not so painful, right? But if it really is the situation that just like the city did not keep up with inflation in the amount of money it was taking in from Buffalonians, and the only thing that a city can just do on its own like that without permission from Albany is make tweaks to the property tax code, then like I understand why a property tax hike of some sort is going to be inevitable. But take my opinion with a grain of salt, right? Because like all of this shit is easy for me to say because I don't have to pay these property taxes. I don't live in the city of Buffalo anymore. I spent 15 years bouncing back and forth apartments in like the University Heights and in Kenmore. And I still work in downtown Buffalo. My 40-hour week full-time gig is in downtown Buffalo. All my friends and family are still in Buffalo. My wife is fond of saying like our house is in the South Towns, but our community is still in the city because like everybody we know and are related to or whatever lives up there. But so this is all easy for me to say because I am exactly the type of person who gets to benefit from the city but doesn't have to pay for it.